Welcome everyone. Welcome to Virtual VSC. Thank you for coming here virtually. My name is Kristen Mills. I am the Visual Arts Program Manager here at Vermont Studio Center. We're doing a lot virtually with visiting artists, visiting writers. Tonight we have Rubens Ghenov. Rubens is our amazing, excellent visiting artist tonight. And he's already on the screen if you can see him. He's got the headphones on and the beard. And we wore the same outfit tonight intentionally. So don't get us confused. But
don't get it twisted.
First of all, Rubens is an Aries. I'm shocked. I just found out that like 10 minutes ago. I know Rubens actually from Tyler School of Art, where he was teaching and I was a grad student. And then, well, I did a number of ridiculous things after, but our worlds overlapped for a little bit. And actually I did a benefit for something and he was our DJ for Cloud. And that was amazing. That actually just gave me the chills because it was so cool.
Yeah.
So Rubens is a DJ, he's an educator. He teaches at the University of Tennessee right now. So he's in Knoxville, or that's where the school is. Rubens was born in São Paulo, Brazil, and immigrated to the US in 1989. He holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Tyler School of Art and a Master of Fine Arts from Rhode Island School of Design. He is shown nationally in both solo and group exhibitions at Morgan Lehman Gallery, Geoffrey Young Gallery, Mindy Solomon Gallery, Whitespace Gallery, TSA in Brooklyn, the Woodmere Art Museum in PA, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. In 2013, he co-curated with Dona Nelson the 72nd Annual Juried Exhibition at the Woodmere Art Museum. Rubens has been featured in Art in America, Hyperallergic, Bomb Magazine, Village Voice, Burnaway, Title Magazine, and the Village Inquirer. Again, he's currently an assistant professor of painting drawing at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I was going to say something about Rubens' work, but that's his job to do that now. But what I'm excited to learn about more is his intersection of fact and fiction and this notion of storytelling. And yeah, Rubens, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, my people. I appreciate it. Thank you, love. First and foremost, it's really quite nice when people believe in you and believe in your work, and they oftentimes have you partake on things like this. This is the second time that Kristen has asked me to partake of a forum like this. The first, if you remember, it was with Pepon, yeah?
Oh yeah, that's another one. That's right, yeah. That's right. That was so cool.
Yeah, thanks to you, whom I love that man very dearly. So I was very touched and honored to be asked to do this. And thank you all for showing up on a Monday night at that. I'm gonna share my screen, okay? Cool. Okay, so I'll do it like this, okay. So tonight what I like to do is basically create a bit of an aerial view for you that I've tried to create for myself in order to talk about the work. Oftentimes I like to engage these talks in talking much more about my research, what I call my research, as opposed to showing the paintings. I think the paintings are irregular when shown in this space, but that's what these talks are often about. And I'm glad to see people's works through talks like this. So that apology is not really an apology. It is on par with the course. But I am basically going to build a glossary of terms, and the paintings that you'll be seeing are not at all in chronological order. But they are simply addressed here in the way that they are to give a sense as to how they are affected by these glossaries or this glossary of terms. So more than likely the title of the talk, which is in this manila folder, will make sense. My practice is a triad. It's this triangular thing divided into three parts, all of which revolve and comes from painting, is absorbed in painting. But it's painting Um, I would not say that I'm a musician, but I make sound, and sound is incorporated in the work. Sound oftentimes is kind of like a drawing practice for me, but sound also gets to be part of the show, and is part of what I do. And also the idea of storytelling and a specific way of utilizing storytelling and or fiction in my work. One of the things that I find to be a basis for what artists tend to do or like to do or are called to do or are, I don't know, maybe bred to do, is that we are constantly in the preoccupation of siphoning the unseen, the internal, the visceral into form, bringing the unseen into the scene. And this trajectory, for me, this idea of thoughts having forms already in the cerebral, or let's say in the spiritual or in the soulical or what have you, have a really difficult trajectory in terms of coming out as form in the physical realm. And I think that this trajectory of bringing the unseen into the scene is also a triadic form, because we have that which is in the mind or in the person. We as people are another part of that triad, as artists who have a cultural background, an ethnic background, a philosophical, psychological, cultural background, that we also simultaneously use the third condition of this triangularity, which is the idea of materials that we use in order to bring these things forward. And for a long time, I have been wanting to bring into my paintings the object of an earring. This doesn't make sense necessarily over here, and more than likely might not make sense later, but the image that you see with this circle being adjacent or adjoined to a triangle, for me, is the earrings that are in my paintings. The earrings, for a long time in the universe that we live in terms of planet Earth, has been an accoutrement, an object of adornment that goes back into the earlier civilizations that we can trace back to in finding our humanity, that is also connected to a higher calling of sorts. Earrings are symbols. They come from materials that artisans have made them, that talk about this interior logic, but then are made via materials and are also worn as it relates to this symbological form, if you will, and also a question of adornment. For me, this notion of internal, external, micro, macro is something, or visceral and cerebral, is something that I think quite a lot about. And the earring for me, as an accoutrement of sound, has been something that I've been thinking quite a lot for a long time. I'm interested in the idea of sound for a plethora of ways, but sound for us humans enters from the external into our ears, but we also project sound from our internal space, from our throats, vocal cords, throats, esophagus, through our mouths. And this kind of triangular, again, trajectory of sound in us makes me think about the earring as an accoutrement that is symbolic of this unseen and very palpable thing as sound, because sound is also physical, and how these two internal and external conditions can have a symbol that is also an object of pleasure, beauty, symbols of a plethora of things that we humans tend to deal with. As it relates to the earring, I think of the earrings in my paintings as mantras. This page here is from a book by the Mexican poet and writer and diplomat named Octavio Paz, who writes about the twilight language. The name of the book is called Conjunctions and Disjunctions. In the bottom paragraph there, it says, if the body is earth, the sacred earth, it is also language, and a symbolic language. In each phoneme and in each syllable, there lies a seed, a bija, that emits a vibration and a hidden sense when it is actualized in speech. Rasana represents the consonants and Lalana the vowels. This he later calls the twilight language, which is the intentional language, which is the mantra. Mantra is a sound unit composed of consonant and vowels in a syllable. And as most people know, a mantra is something for the process of meditation, for the process of contemplation. And so I think of the earrings as mantric as it relates to this notion of the invisible becoming visible in my paintings and for other reasons that we'll later talk about. One of these ideas that for me, one of the conditions of the artist that for me has been always of interest is also the notion that I think that we as artists are much more tied to the lineage of priests, monks, oracles, shamans, people that are also trying to extirpate these unseen conditions that we as humans have, extirpate the mystery or the secrecies of the universe through our very own bodies and putting them out as forms. And often when I think about this, I am reminded of this quote by Richard Tuttle, where he says that the job of the artist is to come up with how the mystic can be accommodated. And this notion of mysticism, for me as a Brazilian, has always been really interesting. I grew up in São Paulo, as Kristen mentioned, and oftentimes in Brazil, you would see small shrines made on corners of streets where there would be a bottle of rum that was half drunk, a candle that was then snuffed out, and the body of a chicken laid out very beautifully in sort of altar shrine-like status on corners. My mother one time explained to me where these things came from. And I was always fascinated by these forms that I understood. I understood what a candle was, I understood what a chicken was, but I didn't understand the arrangement, the composition, and the importance of these things. And for me, growing up in that environment, these things always resonated and stayed in the back of my mind as something that fascinated, and I think perhaps later caused me to make the work that I make today. In thinking about the mystics and in thinking about this idea of oracles and things, I'm a big Jorge Luis Borges fan. And in one of the stories called The Sect of the Phoenix, Borges talks about a group of a secret society that he, in the story, names the Mystagogues. And the Mystagogues had this specific ritual that involved 3 items, actually maybe a 4th. And the items are cork, wax, or gum arabic. And sometimes in the liturgy, mud is mentioned, or clay. And oftentimes what happens with Borges' stories is that he was such a sort of beautifully well-read person that he oftentimes took things from factual history and then mingled them with a fictive apparatus. And when you are reading a Borges short story, at least I oftentimes didn't know what was fact or what was fiction. And so I began looking at groups of history, within history, to see if I could find people who conducted rituals that utilize these 3 or 4 elements. And I found nothing up until I found an article that showed this photograph taken in Japan of this man between these 2 trees. I'm not quite sure if you can see it, but there is a tiny little man, and he looks tiny, not because he's little in stature, but he's kneeling, and he's kneeling upright. So his knees and his feet are on the ground, but his buttocks are not sitting on his heels. He's just sort of standing upright as if he were like an L. And in the article, it talks about this photograph that certain people would conduct these strange rituals where they would come into the woods and would bring these 3 items that Borges sources in the story: cork, gum arabic, and wax, and sometimes mud. And this man is conducting this specific rite. Throughout much of the research that I then tried to find, and now thinking that this wasn't necessarily Borges' fictive imaginations, but that this was something that perhaps he had read about in history, I began to then look, research, until I came upon this article from 2006. And it was an obituary-like article about an unpublished Spaniard poet named Angelico Morandá, whom you see here in this newspaper article. Angelico was a very interesting person because his poems are hard to find because he was unpublished, but also a lot of his notebooks, which in his apartment, thousands, I wouldn't say thousands, but copious notebooks were found with what I believe he thought were his poems. But these poems had diagrammatical mappings using pieces of literature, mathematical numbers, cartographic things that he was looking at. But one of the things that was interesting is that also in his apartment, these 3 items were found, which is, again, the items that were in Borges's novel. You see at the bottom, el corcho, which is cork, goma árabe, gum arabic, and a piece of wax. And these items he would bring to these rituals that he would conduct in the woods. Alongside these other items, he would bring a cassette tape player that he would make loops in cassette tapes in his kitchen, and would bring these loops to these rituals in the woods. This is taken from a photograph that was later found in a Portuguese magazine. Alongside these other articles, he would bring a shroud that he would cover his face, but the shroud wouldn't completely cover his entire head. The sides were denuded so that his ears were out into the open, so as to hear the sounds of the forest and to hear the sounds of that he had created. Some of these things, again, are talked about in this magazine called Oratorio, where people like Fernando Pessoa, Proust are mentioned as it relates to specific rituals that they themselves had in their own lives. But the ritual that is talked about in some of these books, this is a book called Anécdotas de las Vidas Poéticas, written by an Uruguayan journalist turned writer named Alfreda Aguiar, that was later translated into the English by a Brazilian woman, strangely enough, named Noricema Washington. And Noricema talks quite a lot about what this ritual was, that Morandá would kneel upright between 2 trees with a shroud over his head with these items, cork, gum arabic, and wax. And he would bring shards of a Chinese or a Korean vase. This is unknown in terms of Alfreda Aguilar, but I believe that now the vases are Korean vases that he used to bring alongside with the cassette tapes. But one of the strangest things about Morandá was that this micro ritual that he used was based on a much larger idea that had to do with some of this note-taking that he made. As I said before, he was born in Spain, in a town called Salamanca. And at one point, through some devising that he made, some calculations that he made, he immigrated from Salamanca to a town named Faro in Portugal. You can see that smack there in the middle of that triangle in Portugal. But if you notice, all the way up to Sweden, there's another town named Faro with the umlauts. And at the very bottom of that diagonal line, there's another town named Faro in the state of Pará, in the north of Brazil. All these three towns have the same name, and they make this perfect diagonal line. Also, in many of his writings, there was a lot of conversation about this plumb line that divides Libya and Egypt. Moranda was kind of an Egyptologist of sorts, a self-taught one at least. He was really interested in certain esoteric conditions, or what he had done quite a lot of research as it related to Egyptians. But the interesting thing is that this triangle is made by the equator line at the bottom that basically touches the town of Faro and the country of Congo. There were the majority of the things that were written in these copious notebooks by Moranda were things that had to do with the Congo, or the Bakongo, which basically is dealing with Angola, Congo, Luanda, and these countries in Central Western Africa. And so this creates this perfect triangle, which is a symbol that he constantly dealt with in his writings, in these mathemizations, if you will, mathematics as it relates to these diagrams and maps. And so the symbol of the triangle, for me, began to be something that I have been thinking quite a lot about as it relates to this secret, or to this unknowing condition that was so important to Angelico. And I try to kind of put a lot of these things together that were found in his notebooks, things that from his notebooks that I was able to acquire or look at in sort of this diagram. But then the triangle begins to appear throughout my paintings for quite a long time. And again, these paintings aren't necessarily in order. But again, I wanted to put them in here to access the term of the triangle within my glossary. The majority of these paintings are 20 by 16. They are linen wrapped, stretched over panel. And I use clear gesso to show the flesh of the linen oftentimes. And some of these paintings, they're completely glossed over, of course. But I would say for the most part, you can see parts of the linen. And all of these are acrylic and sometimes graphite. Sometimes the triangles sort of merge with other triangles. This sort of little triangle made out of a leaf were these little sculptures that he would make with leaves around his apartment. He had tons sort of strewn around his shelves. Text will also appear in some of these paintings. I can talk about that later, or maybe in our Q&A. And some of the things that are happening in these paintings that I have yet to talk about will come in later as well. The circle is another object that, and this one especially comes from sources that are not as secretive as, let's say, the triangle. But the circle comes a lot from his studies about the Bakongo, about the Congo, about West African religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, and celebratory and ritualistic ways within West Africa and Central Africa. This is from a book by Robert Farris Thompson called The Flash of the Spirit. The little paragraph in there says, the Bakongo symbolized the daily journey of the sun around the mirrored worlds of the living and the dead by means of the spiral shape of the cordia shell. They also express the same idea architecturally with the concentric spaces of the royal enclosure, the Luwumbu. A newly elected king would make a circular tour of his domain, symbolically passing through the worlds of the living and the dead, thereby acquiring mystic insights proper only to a Congo king. So the circle was something that Moranda wrote quite a lot about. And what he would write about oftentimes was that these things didn't necessarily just come from the Congo or these places in Africa, but they came also from Europe in terms of, for instance, Ramon Lowe, that precedes the Renaissance. Here he says that the heaven, says Lowe, has a soul, though not a vegetative, instead of rational soul, and he moves in a circle. This is from a book, I believe the name of the book is called House as Symbol of Self. Among the Dogon and the Bambara of Mali, every object and social event has a symbolic as well as a utilitarian function. Houses, household objects, and chairs have all the symbolic quality in the Dogon civilization, otherwise relatively poor, has 7,000 symbolic elements. The farm plots and the whole landscape of the Dogon reflect this cosmic order. Again, this condition of the micro and the macro. The villages are built in pairs to represent heaven and earth, and fields are cleared in spirals. And this is quite beautiful because the world has been created spirally. The villages are laid out in the way the parts of the body lie with respect to each other. While the house of the Dogon, or paramount chief, is a model of the universe at a smaller scale. We can also see this idea of the circle in much more contemporary beliefs. This is from something that comes out of 5% Nation of Islam, which says that the cipher is a circle, a completion of 360 degrees, consisting of 120 degrees. Let me do this. Knowledge, 120 degrees wisdom, 120 degrees understanding. The cipher has no beginning or ending point, so that we may rid our cipher of all negativity. A cipher is a person, place, or thing. Everything in life pertains to a cipher. Cipher is C-I power her. A lot of this kind of knowledge also has been utilized or repurposed or coming from beliefs from 5% Nation of Islam in the realm of hip hop as well. So every time that there is a circle in the paintings, I am thinking about the conditions that have been important to Moranda in his studies about this symbol, connections with macro and micro, this idea that the world has been created, or that the universe is also a circle, which many, I think according to Robert Farris Thompson, the Congolese people believe that the universe is a circle as well. And in some of these paintings, you are beginning to see the circle sort of being adjacent or trying to connect with the triangle. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. Sometimes the circle is split in half or is beginning to be shown in a piece of wood, or in my mind, a shelf. Oftentimes they seem to be entering in, trying to osmose with either books or with other circles. And this sort of adjacentry, if you will, of the circle and the triangle sort of coming together goes back for me in terms of what Otávio Paz related to in talking about the mantra, which is this syllable made out of consonants and vowels. To create this mantra, to create this earring, to create a sound unit that is an object or made there for the purpose of contemplation and meditation. So whenever you see this teardrop in the paintings, I'm thinking about these as this earring that is the mantra within Morandá's praxis. The last 3 or so years, the paintings have not necessarily shown so much of these teardrop shapes. These are a little older, maybe 3-4 years older. But nowadays, I'm much more interested in seeing the mantra in becoming, as opposed to having already become the mantra. So oftentimes, the triangle, the teardrop, the circle are sort of in the sliver of their communication or in the sliver of coming together. I have a bar at the top. I don't know if your bar is at the top, but at the top of oftentimes there's some text in there. I don't know if you're able to see it. I had to move my little dock up top. Oops.
Rubens, do you mean the text that is broken kind of at the top above the orange box?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I got it on my end, so.
Okay, cool. All right. This painting was in the last show I had with Morgan Lehman, and I began to make some of these paintings a lot larger. This is like 60 inches by 48. And I began to be really interested in shelving these 20 by 16 paintings within a larger physical context. So some of the paintings that are a bit busier, not necessarily this one, because this one goes back to 20 by 16. But some of the larger ones, I began to try to treat the paintings like a shelf, to talk about this architecture that for Morandá was the way that he saw his meditation, having to be between two trees, also in relationship to the earth. He wrote extensively about this thing that he called the U-shaped choir. Where other cultures might conceive of the physical and the metaphysical as at best a parallelism, a necessary irreconcilable dualism, the Haitian peasant resolves this relationship in the figure of right angles. This was very, 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 very important. And again, displays itself numerous times in his copious notebooks. Keep doing this. Sorry, I have to do this again. You can see the right angles also in his map. That plumb line between Libya and Egypt point directly down to the equator. And when it bottoms out, it makes a perfect right angle as well. This also was written copiously via Morandá. And it bottoms out at Congo in there, where a lot of his research and his writing comes from. So this U-shaped choir was really important for him as it relates to the notion that he needed to be between two trees on top of the ground in this L-shaped form, in this triangular form, a triangle in the becoming as it relates to this ritualistic practice, as much in the sense of this man here in Japan. You can see the U shape in there, the triangle, and some of this diagrammatic language comes right out of Moranda's notebooks. Being that this was a secret society without writing, without gods, without deities, without any nomenclature to sort of compose itself historically, many people in the world have been thought of as being part of this secret society, and one of them is Fra Angelico. And we can begin to see some of these things compositionally through some of his paintings. I'm only showing this one because this is my favorite painting of Fra Angelico. But the notions of circles and triangles and this U-shaped choir are sort of happen quite often throughout his painting, especially this one. This is a tiny little painting in San Marco in Florence. Another person that is thought of coming from this particular group, let's say, is Joseph Albers, who made the Homage to the Squares. I've been really interested in the Homage to the Squares, especially the studies to the Homage to the Squares, which has these orthogonals that creates these triangular spaces in the paintings, as well as Morandi. There's a perfect U many times in Morandi's paintings. And where he places the bottoms, there's these strange shards that oftentimes come down, pointing as if they were a U shape with conditions of the celestial, the cosmic, or the divine sort of penetrating into the surface of the U-shaped choir. And for a while, I was really interested in this idea of Morandi as being a still life painter and Joseph Albers dealing with the square abstractly, but not abstractly. This notion that Albers was able to take the physicality of the object of a painting in a square and fold it into itself. And I began a while back to try to combine these two forms. When I was in grad school, I got hip to these paintings called Chae-Kori paintings. These are 19th century from the Joseon dynasty in Korea, named Chae-Kori. And they often reminded me of the Homage to the Square, the study to the Homage to the Square paintings, and having items and accoutrements of still lifes shoved inside of them. These paintings, in some ways, quite saved my life because they had, these were painted on screens, and these screens would sit behind a scholar's desk for the sake of contemplation and meditation. Many of them are quite huge. This is a pretty large one. And oftentimes they too would somewhat abstract the perspective of these objects, much like this one, so that the scholar would feel as if he, she, or they were behind the screen, looking into their front, which is something that I've been really fascinated by. As Kristen mentioned before, I come from São Paulo, Brazil, which is a huge city with these really beautiful high Latin modernist buildings that oftentimes resembled shelves for me as well, that hold the most important accoutrements of all, which are human beings. But at a certain age, I moved from São Paulo to Brazil, where the architecture was quite different, a little bit lower. And I lived in a building between a tobacco factory and a favela. Favela, of course, in the Northwest, we erroneously call shanty towns. But this is an image of a favela, of these houses that are sort of fitted in a mount wherever there is space that can be congregated or can be built in. So I grew up in front of one of these, and every day from school around the age of 10, I would come home, eat lunch, open the window, and watch this life being lived out. And these things also reminded me quite a lot of these shelves that were sort of stacked precariously, holding, again, the most important object as humanity inside of these little shelves, tunnels. So I've been thinking quite a lot about this notion of this merging of what we call abstraction and what we call representational things sort of being slightly amalgamated, but somewhat undissolved. Whenever you see a piece of wood in the paintings, I'm trying to channel this shelf-like structure, but also trying to channel the name of my country, which is the word Brazil, that the Portuguese, when they came to the country, were siphoning the land from their Brazil wood, which is this wood that they were able to extract red dye in order to take back to Europe. And the country was basically named after what the Portuguese were exporting and taking from the people who actually lived there before. But these are some of the paintings that are beginning to show this shelf-like construct of the woods and of things that relates to shelves and having these accoutrements separated and displayed in shelves for the sake of contemplation in their mantric quality or endeavor. And again, some of these are quite old. I think this painting is from like 2011. This painting is from 2014. This is from 16. This is a much larger one, like 60 by 48. Little by little, I'm beginning to put these images of these vases in here that come from a specific collection that I found that had some resonance with some of the shards that Morandat used in his rituals. This is probably the only horizontal painting I've made in the last 8 years. This is a tiny little one with the U shape and the earring or the consonant and the vowels attempting to osmose. One of the things that I've been thinking heavily about for a while too is this this idea of divination and divination being made through painting. So much of what is talked about in painting language is the facture of the artist, the hand of the artist, the touch of the artist, which is something that I don't necessarily find so much in my paintings. But I'm also interested in what the hand of the actual material would do. I'm an acrylic painter, and water is the thing that dissolves that medium. And so I'm really interested in the way that the water itself will paint vis-a-vis this graphic quality that appears somewhat handless in their graphic notations. I'm interested in that contradiction. I'm also thinking about finding architecture that holds this divinatory condition in shelves.
Hey, Rubens.
Yes.
No, keep going. This is awesome. We already have questions pouring in. So I
Oh,
didn't
cool.
know
All
if
right.
you wanted me to interrupt you with some and keep scrolling while answering, or if you want to, I just wanted to see where you were at and what you thought.
That's great. I'm almost done.
Okay, stick with what
yeah,
you're doing then. Okay, I didn't want to
Yeah.
interrupt you. Sorry.
No, it's cool. If you want to, I'm game with that as well.
Do what you're doing.
I just want to quickly talk about these vases because these vases have been really important and it comes from this specific collection that I found. I've been sort of transferring them onto the smaller paintings like you've seen before, but and then drawing on top of them with graphite into the paintings. This is from from the last show at Morgan Lehman. And sometimes it's the negative space that I'm using of them, or sometimes I'm actually trying to paint them with this divinatory condition of pouring the water. There's a little bit of a vase in there and these asleep books. And I got really interested in the vases, and I've been making sort of collages and drawings using them in the studio as well. And at one point, I wanted to just do a lot of drawings with these, but I wanted something else to happen with them as opposed to just drawing with them. And what I ended up doing is I photocopied them and blew them up and printed them on large canvas, maybe about 40 by 30. And I got this affiliated fellowship through my university to go to the American Academy in Rome, where this studio is, and began to work on these there. So these are a few shots of those paintings. This is slightly backwards from the way that I was using the vase. The vase on these began the paintings as opposed to sort of enter midsection. This is from a show in Miami with Nicole Cherubini. It's really interesting to be in shows oftentimes that people don't just clump you in terms of abstract artists, that they deal with the fictive or with notions of pottery and so forth. Lately in the studio, I've been making these paintings that are 12 by 12, the size of record covers, that I've been thinking about ancestors' heads while using this divinatory idea of the pouring. I don't even know if these paintings are done, but there's no linen over these. This is straight onto the wood. And again, these are 12 by 12. And I had a residency in nearby in North Carolina. Marjorie Dial started a residency called Township 10. And I began making these paintings that are split into quadrants that I've been calling mantra paintings. They all start based on these four almost small chessboard where I've been making similar moves, and the moves switch, but the earrings are appearing, the circles are appearing, the triangles are appearing in these. And again, I'm not quite sure if these are done. Last but not least, the notion of this triangle for me and for Moranda has been something that is ultimately a very mantric condition for me in terms of meditation and contemplating as to what the work is, where the work is coming from, because Moranda himself is also a triangle much like my own practice of sound painting and storytelling, because he comes from these three characters in here. His body is constructed out of Morandi, whom you see at the top left, Borges, whom you see at the top right, and Igor Stravinsky as a symbol of music composer. So the photograph of Moranda that comes from this newspaper is also a fictive construct, a construct that I can then embody, disembody, pay attention to. I often call Moranda a bodhisattva of sorts for me. And even though he's invented and he is fictive, he oftentimes allows me the contemplation to dip into my little micro towards a larger macro, or even if I am a macro, to the micro of my paintings. He also is part of my work. He is the fictive component of where a lot of these things get placed in the cauldron. I think I'll stop at that if that's cool. Okay. I'll stop sharing. If people want me to go back to images, I'll click back on. Is that cool?
Yeah. You can You can click around, look at images. I'll read a couple of questions and then that might dictate what you want to do. Let's see, the first one from Maria. Thank you for sharing your work. I see that incorporating many geometric shapes in the artwork. I'm curious as why you selected specifically the writings of Miranda. I think that's who she meant, as a basis for your work, as a vehicle for making the invisible visible, i.e. making it into form.
Yeah. It gets difficult for me to answer questions like this about Moranda, because I think that oftentimes questions about Moranda during the lecture begins to be problematic for people, because they are taking him as a person who actually lived like I live in history. And only towards the end of the lecture, people find out that he is also a fictive construct. So much of what we read are historically, or even about history. We look at a painting by Matisse, and we will often talk about formal qualities or things that took place after the war. You know, reasons as to why people do things that they do that end up being exegetically opened up solely in speaking about the form. There is a time where people begin to say, well, you know, Matisse's health began to grow decrepit, right? Matisse began to think about making drawings from his bed or cutting out shapes, you know, then they go back to their history. For me, as an immigrant turned naturalized citizen, I'm constantly trying to piece together the world in which I come from that is now grafted into something that's foreign. Being grafted is a strange condition, but being grafted for me is a parallel of what siphoning the world via a fictive construct. I know that we shit on Picasso quite heavily because of what he did to misusing, misshaping, or utilizing the African mask per se. But I think for Picasso, looking at the mask sort of gave him a salvation, because he understood that the practitioner of Yoruba traditions, on the artifacts of those masks, they were putting their fears, their anxieties, their desires, their notion of fighting against, let's say, evil forces on top of the mask, you know. And for me, fiction is often truer than what we generally tend to call truth. Is a place that is open for you to actually put your own experiences, your own memories, that which is imagined, that which is solely felt, that which is created, recreated in someone's mind, that which I may find true of me and somewhat true in someone else, that can be compacted and concocted. Fiction has a place that it can absorb all those conditions. And if it can absorb things holistically, then I find them to be higher than that which cannot absorb conditionally. And that ultimately is my way of engaging with myself through someone who is fictive. And that's why I am interested in the writings of Moranda. I'm interested in the writings of Moranda also because I don't comprehend them totally. I don't know why it's not that I create him wholly and then I have a field day and try to figure out why he's interested, why I'm trying to paint those things. So much of what took place in the transatlantic slave trade, so much of what takes place in the Americas have to do with a lot of things that we yet don't know. So much of West Africa has been preserved in the land of Brazil because the people of the continent of West Africa brought and recontextualize their beliefs through the beliefs of others, right? That the Portuguese enforced Catholicism upon them, but then they recreated, right? Santeria, Candomblé, Macumba, Umbanda, all of these things beautifully reinvented the Yoruban, the Dahomian traditions of West Africa through a Western colonization, you know? And so there's a lot of mystery in there that Moranda allows me to also step into, you know? That's a very vomitous answer, but I hope it gives like a bit of a...
That was amazing. I love how you answered that. That actually put it into a perspective that I could hold on to. So that was great.
Okay, cool.
Personally, I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but I can't see them. So
I hope whoever asked is pleased. If not, we
well,
can
at
maybe
one point
talk
she did
later.
say, "That's right, you answered the question."
Okay, okay. All right.
And then I'm going to jump around a little to these questions because somebody did say that their question relates to Maria's. Which came first for you, the research on the symbolic meanings of those shapes or the visualization of those shapes in your paintings?
Yeah, beautiful question. I like that. This is the thing that is interesting about being a painter, is that oftentimes things reside in your cerebral without you knowing what they're there for, why they arrive there. But I think that if you are faithful and loyal to the images that haunt you, that visit you, they will, I wouldn't say explain, but they open themselves up to you if you ingest, digest, and let's say excrete them out in form, you know? And so I would say that what's happening with the symbols and the research is happening more like this. They teeter and they bat at each other, so that what becomes is this movement in between these forces hitting each other, as opposed to a chicken or the egg, you know. But oftentimes, the name Angelico Morandá came from a show I had in Philadelphia called The Silent H, and I had a painting named after Angelico Morandá, which had to do with another triangle, which is Fra Angelico, Giorgio Morandi, and this Brazilian song named Borandá, that I made that name. And through that name, I realized that there was a person in there. And so oftentimes a symbol might come first, but the research has been there all along. And then they begin to sort of concoct themselves together. Whereas other times the research, I think really is a parallel as opposed to one coming in front of the other, you know? I hope that answered. Oh yeah, okay, thank you. I see.
You got a thumbs up, nice.
Where?
Here's another one. Could you talk a little about, oops, hold on a second. Could you talk a little bit about how your color palette and use of color gradients relate to the strong geometric connections in your work?
Oh, thanks for that. Color is important. The world is in color. My man Joshua just gave me a shout. Joshua and I are studio mates, and he and I talk quite a lot about this. The color blue has been really important for me in relationship to the idea of dusk, the time of the day when Sisyphus comes down from the mount. Sisyphus, Camus have been sort of mantric for me as well, as it relates to Marxist ideas or the life of the proletariat, of rising early to go to work, going to work, and then coming back from work. In my mind, that happens in a 9-to-5 day of Sisyphus, taking the boulder up the hill. And at the top of the hill at 5 o'clock, he lets go of the boulder and has his descent during dusk. That color of dusk for me is the time where I don't know, I'm crying, sorry. The descent from the sun allows open reflection, allows meditative thinking and thought. That gray bluish color for me has been something that has haunted me for quite a large part of my life, that I, again, concoct these things together because they, for me, feel they loom above me without an exegesis or explanations. But for me, it's the time of thinking without holding a boulder up the hill. It's a time of thinking. It's a time of contemplation. It's a time of reflection, which for the human is a way of existence. You know, that's how I would answer about the colors. There's a lot of pinks and greens in the paintings as well. These colors oftentimes come from songs. There is a school of samba in Brazil named Mangueira, which the translation is a hose, a water hose, and their colors is pink and green. They're dear to my heart for various reasons. I think of colors that are in me. Recently I found out that, not recently, but I would say about 15 years ago, my mom spoke to me about that her lineage in Brazil comes from a woman named Theodora, who was the daughter of a Portuguese merchant and a Congolese woman. That my lineage comes from her. So I think quite a lot about the colors that are inside of me ethnically, as it relates to the colors that might be in the paintings as well, you know. Yeah. Oh, there's a, I think
that was great. Thanks, Rubens, for your vulnerability. Somebody just wrote, thank you for sharing your work. When working, do you, for lack of a better way of saying, do you work as yourself or in the method as an actor of your fictive I?
As myself, always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have, in graduate school, I was working with another fictive poet who was he was a hip hop MC who was mute, and he was deaf and mute, and I began to make work vicariously through that persona, and quickly found out that I had no interest in being someone else in the studio. And early on, I then figured out that these people are people in and of themselves in their own right. And I am looking at them as opposed to me being them. There is an embodiment that does take place in the studio when I'm constantly thinking of them, but I am not them, you know, but I do work as myself, you know.
I have a question, and I keep trying to look up the word for it, and I can't find it. But I'm interested in the text that you use.
Oh, yeah.
Just because I think text in paintings can be extremely intriguing, but again, going back to that secret, and also where the text kind of erases itself, text on text.
Yeah.
So is it about that? Is it about like kind of understanding and not understanding, or?
Yeah. A lot of the paintings, a lot of the work has this line right in the middle that cuts, divides one thing and the other. That happens often, and that happens quite a lot in the text as well. The text comes from a bunch of sources. They come from names of books that Moranda would have written, names of poems that he would have written. They themselves oftentimes are poems. A lot of the words that are in there are made up words, English, Portuguese, and Spanish. Sometimes there might be French words in there. Oftentimes the thinking around the painting, they are almost as if they were prayers or libations to the praying. Oftentimes, because they're made up, I forget what the words were in the first place. So they then themselves become mysterious to me, you know. They might come, half of one word that's also cut off might come from a song, and me taking that word, creating a verb, conjugating that verb, and placing it underneath another word that I've been thinking about as it relates to something else in Moranda's au revoir or my own personal life, you know. The text is, I am a visual person. If I believe that the text should be there, if it's also part of the visual culture of the painting, as opposed to being there for some kind of readability. I'm not interested in that readability, or I'm not interested in explanations, you know.
I like that.
That's how I would take that, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Cool. Any more burning questions?
If people have questions that they just want to shout them out, it'd be nice to hear voices.
Here,
too.
I can unmute people. Here we go.
But you know, it's all good.
If anyone wants to unmute, I've made that possible. So go ahead and unmute yourself. Kathy said, "Thank you, Rubens. That was beautiful."
Thank you, Kathy, so much.
I thought of that before Kathy said it, just so you know.
Thank you, love. Yeah.
No, nobody wants to unmute themselves. They're shy. Which is okay. Oh, somebody said they can't unmute. Hold on, let me try it again. Allow participants to unmute themselves. Let's try that one more time. Okay, now try it. I just had to click it the correct way. Sorry, that was me.
Hi, Kathy.
Oops, hi. So that was beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
I don't know if I have a question. I have a thought about I was interested in how the dividing line went down your work sometimes and split things, and also that some things were hidden and other things were revealed. And I was just thinking about a book of poetry we were talking about in an online discussion a couple of weeks ago. And that same thing was deployed where things were divided and some was hidden and other parts were revealed. But I think the intention there was really different than your intention. And I don't know if I'm reading it right or not. But there it was sort of to create that sense of being boxed in or being prevented or really not understanding the world in which you're in. But in your work, it feels more like part of a search and a way to maybe reveal through maybe a backward way or something, or sort of like a peripheral vision to look away so you can actually see better. I don't know.
Yeah, oftentimes I talk about my work as a library of the psyche. My dad was a psychologist. Oftentimes I had conversations about my dreams with him, and the way he would talk to me about it was he just sort of looked in my eyes deeply without saying words. And it was this man that I love so much, taking the most absurd thoughts of a little child that were completely perhaps senseless, but in his head he was like connecting threads, you know. So it was a visual thing, a dream being explained verbally, text, then being received as if that reception could be explained. I am interested in the text also being visual. I have yet to make my own fonts, but it takes me a long time to get to the right font, you know. It's the only thing I use Photoshop for is the books, the text in there. And I think there is in there a desire to obscure, obfuscate, confuse, slow down, to tell it slant, so that gradually there can be a condition there. In terms of a shelf or what a shelf looks like, the spine of books begin to be also decorative elements, and accoutrements of decorations also begin to be things that you can read almost as if they were books. So they at times reverse roles, you know? And I think that that dissecting line for me is part like that, when two things are osmosing together, and the role of something can enter into the role of another, you know, that kind of version of embodiment happens in there. So I think for me, a lot of these things that you mentioned are part of the way that I'm thinking about them, you know? Yeah. Hope that was a solid answer.
Oh, it was awesome.
Okay, okay.
I'm going to ask another question because nobody's chatting, so that's fine. Unless somebody wants to, should I give it a second? Sorry, tend to just. Okay, I'm really curious about those 12 by 12 paintings, collages that you're making that are like record albums. You said you just kind of started. That's kind of a recent body of work, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
To me, it seems like you were born making those, you know?
Oh, weird, huh?
Yeah, like just from your love of music, but even the way you talk about colors and symbols, to me, it's like, it's almost like it's finally coming out, but it's like a language you already understood or something. I don't know.
Yeah, It's
Or do you-
difficult to paint in a square, you know?
Yeah.
In those, I'm thinking of them as ancestors' heads also because of, I recently found out that I might be Jewish. I never knew this, you know? Also being light-skinned person and understanding too that you have African in your blood, that your ancestral place goes to places that one visibly cannot see, you know. And the divination aspect for me also is dealing with that attempt to procure something, you know what I mean? I do have ancestors. I don't know what they look like. I don't know what they're like, right? Especially in a country as mixed as Brazil. The squares come from two different things. I started a collaboration with two musicians, Hannah Ben and DeAnthony Parks, whom asked me to collab on a few things. They would send me a song and then I would send them things later. Due to COVID, the interaction sort of fizzled a bit, which I'm trying to revive. They are amazing people. And so I started thinking about maybe that my paintings would be, let's say, the cover of a record. So I started thinking about painting on a square because I've been painting on this portrait 20 by 16 for quite a while. But the other condition is my love of David Hammons, and especially those rock heads that David Hammons made, where, you know, be a soft rock, and he would gather hair from Harlem barbershops and begin to glue them on the rocks and make haircuts, you know. It's one of the things for me that are the highest form of art ever. And when I was at grad school, I spent a lot of time with one of these, and I would go to the museum and write about them. And so I started thinking about this square as this place, like this records. I studied under Angela Dufresne, whom I love very dearly, and during critique, she said, "Rubens, that's all you're making. You're always making record covers." So. It makes a lot of sense, I think.
That's funny.
But I think that's how that trajectory arrived where I'm at. I've always had a hard time, not always, but in the last decade, I had a hard time going into the square, you know. But,
Well, I'm digging them.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Okay, here's a question. Thank you for a beautiful talk. That's a comment. Out of sheer curiosity, with all your interest in earrings, why do you not partake yourself?
What up, Megan? Megan is a good friend. Megan was a student of mine. Yeah, I don't think for a long time, I'm 45 years old. I was born in 75. And in my childhood, I used to love to go with my parents to these, they used to call them hippie fairs in Brazil. It would take like a piazza in the center of a city, and all these artisans would bring the works that they would make, And I always loved rings, bracelets, necklaces, earrings, but also found myself to be somewhat of like a scrawny, kind of ugly kid that you couldn't necessarily adorn yourself towards beauty. You know what I mean? But earrings for me were the one thing that I was utterly fascinated by as an accoutrement of adornment, but it seemed to be something deeper than that, For me, I think my version of my earring is my beard. I know that sounds slightly stupid almost, but I almost wear my beard as if it were my earrings, It's the one thing that I think that for me, as an object to an object, there's a permeable transference that makes me then not to go and wear an earring. I actually I did think about wearing an earring, but that sentiment passed away rather quickly. But that's how I would answer it, Megan. Thanks.
Any last burning questions? Well, thank you, Rubens. That was amazing.
Thank you so much to everyone. I appreciate it wholeheartedly. Thank you.
I know we've tried to get you here, for a while now.
Yeah.
And I'm working on that still, obviously, but I can't wait to see you again in person.
Vice versa, love. I can't wait.
Yeah, that was an amazing talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Awesome. If you want to unmute, we can all clap for Rubens or not. I don't know.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, yay. I see more faces popping up. Hooray.
Gosh, yeah. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Love you all.
Yeah, that was really good.